How laughable is it that Season of Discovery is just a quote-unquote seasonal server of WoW Classic? As of this week, Season of Discovery has become the longest-lasting version of Classic WoW to date. Its life cycle is longer than Vanilla, TBC, Wrath, and Kata. Let's go in and look at some dates. I've mapped out on a spreadsheet the different Classic expansions and added the expansion launch date and end date. So you can see those here. And the end date I'm calling the final date prior to the next expansion release, and the days between the two. At first glance, you might think nothing of it. Vanilla and Wrath both lasted for 600 plus days. So if you go to Vanilla, 644 days. Wrath, from start to finish, 601 days. And Season of Discovery hasn't even hit 500 days at this point in time. But I don't think that this is entirely helpful to look at regarding an expansion lifecycle. The developers have already teased that SoD will transition to be an era server of sorts, so these servers could last for years, like Vanilla era. So looking at that whole end date really isn't a helpful gauge in my mind. I think it's most helpful to look at the time elapsed between the expansion launch and the final raid tier release date. How long did it take to get from the gamer version starting to the final piece of content being added to that version? And this is where it gets interesting. If you look at the 2019 Vanilla to Naxx launch, this duration was 263 days. Launch date from 26th of August of 2019 to December 1st of 2020, 463 days. If you look from TBC launch to Sunwell release, 343 days. Wrath launch to Ruby Sanctum release, which was 2 to 3 months after what people really view as the final complete raid in ICC. And going to Ruby Sanctum, that was 472 days. Cataclysm launch to Dragon Soul initial release was 276, really short. And Season of Discovery launched on November 30th of 2023. And the Scarlet Enclave raid, which was announced today, is going to be released on the 10th of April of 2025. The duration from SoD release to the Enclave, Scarlet Enclave coming out, is 497 days. Almost 500 days between the launch of the seasonal quote-unquote server until the final raid release. And you know what? It has not even been confirmed that this is the last new raid tier that we're getting. There is a world in which SoD could last even longer. Now, we could caveat this by saying SoD gatekept players for 6 to 7 months, not being able to reach level 60, sure. But it's not like players were unable to raid. In fact, some of the players view the first 2 phases of SoD as their favorite, and those 2 phases are SoD for them. So yeah, this still counts when looking at the lifecycle of an expansion or a seasonal server. The sheer amount of content in SoD has been nothing but impressive. With leveling brackets included, we will have had 8 tiers of raid content by the time that Scarlet Enclave comes out. In no other version of WoW has there been this many raid tiers. At this point in time, we know that SoD is the primary testing ground for future Classic Plus. The developers are throwing a bunch of ideas against a massive and active player base of almost 80,000 weekly raiders, and are learning what players like, what keeps them engaged, and what systems work. The longer SoD runs, the more data the team collects to ultimately deliver a Classic Plus experience that players both want and will stay engaged with. When SoD eventually winds down, I will be glad to share my retrospective from a Vanilla and TBC and a Guildmaster perspective. I think it is important to voice what worked well and not so well from a player standpoint, such as I love the economy and the prices of consumables in SoD, yet I'm disappointed by how accessible and common it was to see legendary weapons. But as someone who's been playing since the SoD launch, I will try out the Scarlet Enclave raid, and I think the developer team should be praised for this version of the game that they've created. It has ultimately had its bumps and bruises, but has created a dedicated player base who continue to stick with this longest running version of Classic to date in a seasonal format. Thanks.